I was told I'd never play again. You know, to hear that, you know, so when I'm working with young players, I'm always trying to tell them, you're never prepared for it. And we trained on a match day, home and away. We'd be on the grass at 9 a.m. I mean, the name Psycho, I mean, you expect something. And I think that might have been something that surprised a lot of people when he went into coaching and management, and he wanted to get away from that name.
Today's guest had a career lasting 21 years, playing across all 4 divisions, ending when he was 41 years of age. We'll ask him why he lasted that long in a short time. But now, since hanging up his boots, he's become an advocate for change in the game in terms of equality and stamping out racism in the sport. He was part of the first Post-Clough era and spent 3 seasons here at the City Ground, which resulted in promotion, a 3rd place finish in the Premier League, and of course the quarter-finals of the Europa Cup in '96, where he was the last English club standing. Please welcome to the official Nottingham Forest podcast, on and off the pitch, Jason Lee.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you very much for being here. I was intrigued, I think, when you were going to sit in my chair, just because you're a podcaster yourself, the Absolute Lee podcast, and I was thinking, actually, I feel like I'm going to be interviewed myself here. So, not going to lie, I'm a bit nervous because I've got someone who does the same job as me on the other side of the mic today. So,
no, don't overthink it. I mean, I know you had Michael Dawson on also, and he's obviously spends a lot of time in the studio. I think it's really interesting to see how other people approach these podcasts, you know, different circumstances, different environments, and this is a really good backdrop. So, no, impressed so far. Lovely little studio, lovely little sound. No, it'd be interesting to see how this plays out.
He's embarrassing me even more now putting me on the spot, saying he's intrigued to see how this is going to play out. Hopefully good. Well, let's talk about the backdrop first then. Obviously, we're here at the City Ground, where you started in 94 and lasted here till 97. I've got to ask you what it was like being a Forest player.
It was great. I mean, what I did is I knew the history of the club. You know, Forest was perceived to be one of the big clubs. I mean, they're in the Premier League now, rightly so, but it's in the finances and the history and what you have to contend with now. It's not an even playing field, so, you know, we're kind of watching that at the moment. But back in the day, coming to Forest, they had been relegated out of the Premier League, but the idea was to get back as soon as possible. So I understood the history, and I was thrilled to get the opportunity to play for an established club, you know. So when the call came, I couldn't wait to really get myself stuck in.
Yeah, I mean, established history, and I mentioned that in the intro as well, pretty much were the first post-Brian Clough era as well, coming in with all that history, everything that achieved, trying to continue that legacy or create a legacy of your own. Did you speak about that with your family before you came? Did you speak about that with your friends? Did you know almost what was at stake and what they wanted you to achieve, getting straight back up into the Premier League being one of them?
Well, I was at Southend playing in the same division, and, you know, we'll probably come to that later on, but I knew from the first game of the season that obviously Southend are playing Forest. Forest are the big fish. The game was live on TV. You just knew the expectation for Forest to bounce back was huge. So to get the opportunity to come to the club, I knew there was a fan base that was expectant as well. And I think if you look back, and I do speak to a lot of supporters from that era, you take a lot of things for granted. So I think they would love to have a team that's comfortable in the Premier League. You know, we're struggling, we're fighting for our lives at the moment, but to have a team that's comfortable in the Premier League, holding their own and beating the big sides, you took it for granted back in the day. But, you know, the players that Frank Clark brought in was hungry, keen, and there needed to be change. There was some established players who'd been here, you know, with Brian Clough, but there was also a nucleus of young, hungry players to come in and take it to the next level.
And what was it like, I guess, Frank Clark being in charge? Only been at Orient beforehand, had an assistant management post as well, but pretty much new to the management side of things. Was here when they had their wonder years as well. What was it like for him, and was he the right manager for the job at that time, did you feel, with possibly lacking a bit of experience for people like you coming in who did have experience at that time?
I think it was proven that it was the right choice. Maybe initially people might have questioned it. He knew the history of the club. He had played for Post-Clough. He knew some of the quirks and some of the ways to manage players, which you could kind of see he kind of implemented. But he also knew, and you look at his signings, he was at Leyton Orient, I was at Charlton, Stan Collymore was at Palace. He knew the young players that was playing in and around, reserve team football. Kevin Campbell was at Arsenal. He took him on loan to Leyton Orient. There's Little he knew, obviously, from Swansea. So you could see the younger players that he brought in that he felt might be able to step up. So his recruitment was really good. And as a manager, he wasn't a coach per se. He was a manager. He picked the team. His recruitment was good. He allowed his coaches to get on the grass and do the work. And he wasn't visibly on the training ground every day, which I think a lot of the top managers now, like the Peps and Klopps, I think they're extremely intense and they're there all the time. They don't leave you alone. And speaking to players, I know how mentally fatiguing that can be. So, he allowed you to get on with it. And then when he did turn up, training would intensify and you realise that the manager's on the training ground, we better kind of pick it up a little bit. But that was just the way it was. So there was a new era, there was a new fitness regime, which he brought in as well. The team, I'm not going to say was lazy, but there were some certain traits when I arrived that I thought very comfortable. Training wasn't extremely difficult. Some of the players wasn't used to doing a lot of running. There was a lot of moaning when we was running, and I was kind of used to that. I just thought, you get that done. That's the bare minimum, right? You get the fitness in, you get the running, and then you can go and play good football. So we had to change the mentality of the team and the squad, which he did by bringing in new players, hungry players. He was able to adopt that and implement that. And then we wasn't bullied and we wasn't outrun in games, and we had the quality. And that's how you get success.
Obviously, he said he wasn't really at the training ground a lot. He maybe stayed in his office a bit. When he was down on the touchline during a game, what kind of manager was he then?
He wasn't extremely vocal. I mean, Archie Gemmell was here to start with. Liam McCain was always here. He had his assistants. He had people that would step in. He wasn't extremely vocal. I mean, he's captain. I think players, when you set up a team, you hope that your captain's going to do your job on the pitch. So obviously we had Stuart Pearce, so he would be the leader on the field. And we had other strong characters. I wouldn't say I was a shrinking violet myself. So I think you bring in the right personnel and you let the changing room handle itself. Good teams are built on players. Managers are allowed to obviously recruit and bring in players, but ideally you don't want to be there speaking for and trying to cajole players all the time, because what are they going to do when you're not around?
Did anything else overlap from, do you think, the Clough era? You said maybe not the intensity that you'd have expected from a team like that, which you had, possibly the lack of fitness levels. Did he possibly take anything from that Clough era that you noticed from being in the era before, that you thought, that's a bit of Brian Clough there? What Frank has brought, the way he maybe spoke to you or addressed you sometimes, or did he give you any of these rogue days off like we've all read about?
I think what he did is he still kept a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people would have still been here from the Brian Clough, so it still felt like Brian Clough was kind of lurking around. And
good or a bad thing?
I think good and bad. I think it's like when the great managers leave, the Alex Fergusons and the Arsene Wengers. New coaches, new players, new managers have got to come in and build their own future. So it was important that he brought in new individuals into the environment. So we had to kind of change some of the ideology in and around the football club. But people, Forest fans will always reminisce, and rightly so. It's great history. You're going to reminisce. So you knew when you came in, you heard the stories and you knew the expectation. I think even if it wasn't the manager, there was other people that would tell the little nuggets, the little stories. The Archie Gemmells was around, and I got on great with Archie. He's quite a contentious character. He wasn't for everybody, fiery little man. But I loved him to bits, and obviously his son Scott Gemmell was playing in the team as well, and I really enjoyed playing with Scotty. So all these players still had that Brian Clough influence over them, but then you've got new players who have come in who wasn't part of that, who would just be like, well, that was great. Now we want to try and move
build our own bit of history,
build a new, a little bit of momentum and go in a different way. And that wasn't disrespectful. It was just fully respective of the history of the club, which I was. But I also knew it was time for change and we had to do something different.
Obviously, trying to create your own little bit of history. You had 3 seasons here. What season was your best?
The season, obviously, unfortunately for Forest fans, was when Stan left. I mean, I came in initially in the March '94 when Stan was injured, and strikers at the club would have been Robert Rosario, senior striker, Gary Ball, Lee Glover, from what I remember, and then there was a few younger players. So he still needed somebody to come in who was going to be physical and offer that imposing threat. And he knew what I was about in terms of playing against Southend, and he'd seen me, so he knew me anyway. So the idea was to come in and just keep the momentum going. And Stan came back in, and we played together a few times, but not very often. But that season we did, because we closed the season off well together. But the season we got promoted back into the Premier League, we played with one striker, which a lot of teams do now. So we was quite forward thinking in the way we set up, playing with a number 10, 5 in midfield, whatever it may be, but having one focal point. And Stan would be the focal point, so it was hard for any other strikers to get a game. When we did play together, you can imagine we was a problem for a lot of teams, and he knew he could always call on that. So really enjoyed playing with Stan. But my opportunity came when Stan went to Liverpool. So I was concerned, like all players, and I suppose the club was, what's going to happen next? What's my future? Am I going to get the opportunity? He brought in Kevin Campbell, he brought in Andre Salenzi. You can see, and he's spending money, good money back in the day. And I wasn't a big name signing, and I didn't cost a lot of money. So I think a lot of people felt I would be a squad player. That's not something I wanted to think about. I always wanted to be threatening to get a game. And I knew I had to contend with the new signings coming in, and Brian Roy as well. Brian Roy came in. So I got my opportunity, started the season, started really well, scored some goals, and led the line. And I was really pleased, We didn't have to worry about Stan. We was able to be comfortable in the league and finish the season, mid-table. Obviously, we'd dropped our standards from the season before and the season before that. But as I said, the expectation at the club was, we're going to do something every season. And just to be comfortable in the Premier League, as I said, is something that we would take right now today.
Yeah, I mean, that was the season which obviously was 95-6, was that one?
Yeah.
That was 95. You came in 94, 95 when you finished third, and then 95, 96. Yeah. But you played super well in Europe. That must have been a whole new journey and experience for you yourself, and one which you must look back with great pride.
Of course. Again, people take things for granted. We was the last team left in Europe, last English side. And, there wasn't as many TV channels and this, that and the other, but I remember we was on TV regularly. I was injured, I think the Lyon game at home, and I didn't start the Bayern Munich games, which was really frustrating because I started most of the games. And obviously we went out, we got beat away, and then we got smashed at home. But when you look back on their side, you could see the quality they had. They had some really, really top players. But we held our own. We was a good side. I would have been the lone focal point, the lone striker. Any strikers know playing the game, if you're playing up top on your own, it can be really difficult because obviously you got two centre halves, and you're hoping that people get forward, and you're hoping they get opportunities, and you've got to retain the ball, look after the ball, and inevitably you're getting smashed really by a lot of defenders, and it's a thankless task. So I would say I loved playing, but I found it difficult because I was a lone striker and we didn't create many opportunities during that European run. But we did enough to win games, and I got some assists, and I think the fans still enjoyed it. I still hear them talk about it today, so I know they enjoyed the run.
Do you think Forest, because of what they achieved in Europe, still always have that belief, if we were even to get into any of the European Cups now, we'd still have a belief that we could put on a run like you possibly did there? Didn't make that many chances, but still managed to get to the quarterfinals.
I think that belief comes from the worldwide fan base. I mean, people just wouldn't realise. I mean, when you speak to the younger generation, they don't understand. When you explain to them, and I've coached here and I've worked here in various guises. When you explain to young people like who live in Nottingham, can you imagine like this team won the European Cup back to back?
No, you genuinely can't.
It doesn't resonate with people. They can't believe. They're like, what? Are you talking about the same club? And those conversations would have been had whilst the side wasn't even in the Premier League, being out of the Premier League for so long. So they didn't understand that the club's history And people can say, that fans live in the past, but what history to live in, I'm an Arsenal fan, and we talk about it, and I get some stick on a match day. Yes, Forest is a club that I look out for, and I've got a lot of history and attachment to. But being from London, Arsenal's my team, and Arsenal haven't managed to win the European Cup. So that tells you the magnitude of what Forest achieved, and to do it back to back, and the way they did it, it does surpass what Leicester done in my opinion when they won the Premier League.
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive achievement. Hopefully, one day, as a younger Forest fan, we'll possibly get to see that happen again. Fingers crossed. Hey, obviously got to talk about Stuart Pearce being your captain, a legend here at the City Ground, a legend for all Forest fans. What was he like as a captain? What did he bring to the side and maybe help you bring out in yourself?
I mean, I knew the myth, I knew the legend before I came in. I played against him.
Okay, before that question then, what was your preconception of him like before you met him? What did you actually think he would be like compared to possibly what he was?
Well, I mean, the name Psycho, I mean, you expect something. And I think that might have been something that surprised a lot of people when he went into coaching and management, and he wanted to get away from that name. But as a player, he lived up to that, especially for the fans on a match day. I found him hilarious, I'm not going to lie. He wasn't the biggest, but the legend and the way the fans held him in high esteem, you can tell he fed off them and they fed off him. And some of his mannerisms and some of the things he did, I just thought were strange. And being young... Strange.
I've got to stop you. You can't say the word strange and not elaborate.
I'm going to elaborate in terms of, all right, so he wouldn't warm up. Like, you wouldn't see him on the grass whilst we'd be out there doing the warm-up, which is unheard of. So I'm turning up and I wasn't aware of his pre-game regime, and he just...
Or lack of.
Well, he would warm up, but he would just have his slips on, white pants, basically, the slips what we'd wear, getting ready, no shorts. He might have his socks pulled up if you're lucky, greased his legs, he'd have no top on, and he'd be marching up and down the tunnel. That would be the extent of his warm-up, doing some stretches and this, that and the other, whilst we'd all be outside. And I just found it really weird. We go out, we come back in, he's good to go. We come out, he punches the sky, gets the fans revved up, and he's good to go. I've never seen that before, and I've never seen it since, where a player's allowed to get away with that. But that's where I said that, with the manager, I'd imagine some managers would maybe say you need to go out and warm up, but no one told him what he could or shouldn't do, and he just did what he wanted. And I just thought it was weird. And he was our leader. It wasn't like he was doing anything different. He was obviously used to doing that, but we just had to I had to get used to that.
He was your leader, yeah, in a different way possibly. Did he ever kind of lead by example in terms of what he said in the change room? Was there ever any profound statements that came out of Psycho's mouth?
He didn't overspeak. I think little and often is always the best. I mean, I've been a captain, and you can talk for the sake of it, can't you? When you have the huddles, I always laugh when players have the huddles, because if you really zoom in, sometimes they're just talking nonsense. They just know they've got to have the huddle. It looks good, and it's a little bit togetherness. But when he spoke with passion, and it had an impact, and that's what we needed. From time to, if somebody needs a rocket, industrial language, this, that, and the other, we would be told in no uncertain terms that it's not good enough, and this is what's expected of us. So, as I said, we had good characters anyway, but sometimes you do need to hear that from somebody. And having a good lieutenant, the manager should know who his captain is, and sometimes a manager relies upon his captain to go and get that message into the players. So you would do that. And more importantly, lead by example. If we started the game, invariably he would put the first challenge in, and it would be a ridiculous challenge. And I used to always laugh when the referees used to come running over and say to him, "Come on, Stuart, no more of those." It's probably too late, because the winger would be smashed or in row Z by then, and he's got away with absolute murder on the football pitch. So,
but the referees like that as well.
The referees were a joke. They allowed Stuart Pearce, England captain, to get away with murder. I'm going to say it as it is. Some of the challenges he put in, I know you have to leave your mark on your opposing player early in the game, but he would smash them to the point that some of them I would see limping and probably wouldn't finish the game, and you'd think, that's a booking all day. No booking, just a word, no sending off, and pretty much he would have that player on toast then, wouldn't he? Because that player would be thinking, oh, it's going to be a long afternoon. So that would rev the crowd up. The fans would love him. You'd hear the psycho chant. And as players, we just knew that, okay, here we go. You know, we go into battle. We need to follow the captain, right? Who
else was a big leader personality in that side? Well, from your time there, 94 to 7.
Lots of us. As I said, to have a good side, a good mentality, you need to have more than one leader. So if he was out, Colin Cooper was assistant. He was vice captain.
Yeah, not assistant captain.
Not assistant captain. He was vice captain, and he was a good leader. You know, he'd been captain before, so if he was out, you'd have David Phillips, or you know, there's players who you knew could lead the side, and the spine of the team's important. So Mark Crosley would be experienced, you know, so he's a leader at the back, and then your centre halves are leaders. Then in midfield you need to have some leaders, and then up top you need to have somebody who's strong and who's vocal. And I would like to think when I played I was a leader. Hence, you know, later in my career I was captain, so proved that I was a leader. You need to have players who can not shirk responsibility and can step up. So I don't feel a captain should be the one always screaming and shouting. Some captains won't lead by being vocal, they lead by example. You know, so, you know, it's what floats your boat, really. As long as you're getting a message into the players and they respect you, I think that's the key.
You've spoken about quite a lot of the leaders on the pitch. In terms of the off-the-pitch culture at Forest during your times here, what was that like? The look at which camera. We might be getting a PC answer right now. I'm not quite sure. I'm looking away from Jason.
I think like a lot of football, there was a drinking culture. You know, if you had a day off, bonding, you know, players would go for a drink, and I was teetotal when I played. So for me to come in, I would always be in and around it. Yes, I would go out, I'd socialise, but I didn't get sucked into the drinking. Hence, you know, on a Monday I'd be good to go, wanting to train, and half the squad would be hanging. And that would frustrate me, I'm not going to lie, because you think, come on, let's get the work done. And in today's day and age, you can't get away with that, with all the games and social media and people watching you. But there used to be lock-ins and all sorts, you know. There would be great days. You'd finish training, and if you had a day off, you know, probably some of the players would be missing for a couple of days, because at the end of the day, you would really want to go and get that drink done, right? So a lot of the players would get into that. But for me, I was teetotal, and I wasn't the only one. Chris Bart-Williams, he was teetotal. Scott Gemmell was. You know, we were the boring ones of the squad.
So what did you do then when these guys were having their lock-ins?
We would have a laugh. I would just look at the state of them all. You know, we'd probably be Johnny Cab. We'd be the ones who would drive and know that we could get home safe, and kind of keep an eye on some of the boys and make sure they're okay. It was a good crack, I'm not going to lie. The things I saw was brilliant. I'm just glad I wasn't part of it, in terms of I wasn't steaming, I wasn't drunk. But that was a culture. You could get away. And fans, they joined in. And, you know, there wasn't... People just expose you now, don't they? Anything you're doing, you get exposed, rightly and wrongly. You know, and it's more people just hating on the fact that, you know, you can't do that and you shouldn't be doing that. But, you know, fans in those days, they would be buying you drinks and they'd be lining them up, and they'd just
before a match day as well.
Well, I'm just saying that it was a different era, and people, you know, wasn't as judgmental, should I say. You just can't do that now.
Obviously then, at the end of your time here at Forest, Frank Clark left, and actually Pearce came in, didn't he, as a player manager. Did you have much experience of him getting that role as player manager there? And obviously he brought Nigel Clough back as well. What did you kind of, I guess, learn from that short time he had that role, of him as a person, and what it was like?
I pretty much went out on loan when he took over, but I was there. I mean, I think it was just a learning curve, a steep learning curve for Stuart to go in as player manager at that time.
Did that almost signal like they didn't really know what was going on almost at that point? Clearly.
I mean, it's not easy to take over when a manager leaves. I think it was really difficult under those circumstances. I think every time a manager leaves, players do feel responsible, and we are responsible. You know, we've let the manager down, we've not performed, and especially when we spoke earlier about it actually being a successful period for the club, that just shows you the expectation of the club was to be where they need to be in terms of challenging every season. So, you know, maybe I'm realistic when we look back at it, but I was really sad for Frank when he was asked that he had to step down and leave. And then, you know, the club struggled for a bit, and obviously Dave Bassett came in, Harry Bassett, he came in and he's an inexperienced manager, so he did what he had to do to get the club back to the Premier League. But I think for Stuart, I don't think he would say no. I don't think he could say no. Will you take over? Will you look after the team? He did that, but it wasn't until probably another 10 years later that he went on his coaching pathway. So it just shows you clearly wasn't ready to actually be a manager.
Yeah, and you just mentioned as well, so after Forest, you went on a couple of loan spells and then finally getting signed for Watford at the end of the season in the May of 97, that must have been. And going over there, big club, big presence, a big moment in your career?
Yeah, I mean, I was gutted that I had to leave Forest, but I was never a player who was going to sit around in a squad and not want to be playing on a Saturday. I think that's something that players have to contend with now, being in big squads and just not getting a game. There's no point training. For me, if I wasn't playing, I had to be going out on loan. I had to go and play games. Hence, that's why I've played for a lot of teams, because when your time's up, if you're not in form or the manager just doesn't fancy you. I wasn't going to be that player who was just going to be a squad player. So I would always move on. That's why I played for a lot of teams. Journeyman, people can use that example. But for me, it was about going to play games, and you never get that time back. I spent some time out of the team, and I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't something that I want. You just come in, train, you don't feel part of it. You're not able to offer anything to the squad. You're better off just getting yourself out of there. So for me to go out on loan, I went out on loan to Charlton, where I started, scored some goals. Then I went on loan to Grimsby, and got to the end of my contract where Graham Taylor was looking to rebuild down at Watford. And when I spoke to him and saw the project, I thought, yeah, I'm excited by that. I needed that. I needed to go to a club that was ambitious, and I was going to be a focal point. So it was a really good move for me. Yeah,
and obviously had loads of success there as well in that one season that you were there. Got promoted straight away. Again, obviously on a completely different team to what was happening at Forest. Back on the up, back trying to get into the top flight at that time. What was that season like with A, Graham Taylor at the helm, and then B, as chairman, as Elton John was there at the same time? You were there in the legendary kind of era as well.
Yeah, and another club with history. Those two people were synonymous with the club. They built the club, Elton John and Graham Taylor. So Graham knew his football as well. I didn't fully understand the history that he had. He'd been at similar clubs that I'd worked at in terms of Lincoln, and he knew the Midlands. He knew more than I actually thought he knew, which was really frustrating and annoying for me, because he was a bit of a know-it-all. But what I learned from Graham was that he never left a stone unturned. He was very, very methodical. And you could see why he was, a top manager, and he went on to manage England. So when he brought me in and he said, look, I'm looking to rebuild, I'm looking to get the team promoted. We had some really good players, some senior pros. We was good value for that division. It was us and Bristol City that was contending and fighting for the whole season. And he was very, very, very strict with us, very, very thorough. And I learnt a lot, I'm not going to lie, in terms of preparation. I always thought I was very professional, but he took it to a new level. So when I was coaching the management, I just realised that I wasn't going to let players let their standards slip. I think that's what some players can do. You shouldn't need reminding, but sometimes you do need to remind people that this is what's expected, and you need to live up to that. So yeah, it was certainly something that I needed at that time. What
did Graham Taylor hold in high regard then at Watford? What was like a non-negotiable in terms of training or playing?
Good people to start with. They've got a really good reputation of being a family club. I saw that when I got there. Lots of people was involved. History again. Luther Blissett was back there. He was a legendary striker for the team. Kenny Jackett, who's had a phenomenal coaching and management career, he was there. They was his lieutenants. They was in and around the training ground and the club when I was there. So I was starting to learn quickly about the history of Watford now, and starting to understand I needed to buy into that ethos as well. And training was extremely hard. I mean, we trained, so get your head around this.
Opposite to Forest.
Well, as I said, it got more professional when I came in, because to be fair to Frank, he identified that he needed to bring in Peter Edwards, strength and conditioning. We did the work we needed to do. And you had the nutritionist
back then. You had everything.
We did what we needed to do.
Above and beyond.
Yeah, Forest elevated. So They moved beyond the Post-Clough era. But Graham Taylor was doing that. his teams were always very physical, very fit, and you would never outrun any of his sides. And we had lots of data analysis on how much distance we'd covered, whether it be training or in games. So there was no hiding place. There would be stuff up on a Monday, and if your stats were low and you started to look at it, you had no excuse if he dropped you out of the team, because you thought, well, he's showing you there that you're actually not doing enough. So he was ahead of the curve in that respect. But, you know, a Monday's generally an easy day. Sometimes a Monday would be an extremely hard day under Graham Taylor. We'd get in thinking, great performance at the weekend. Monday, we're getting smashed, you know, running. And you just thought, wow, is this the reward? Is this the gratitude? But he's just letting you know that, you know, don't take anything for granted. You don't know what days are going to be off. You don't know what days are going to be easy and hard. And we trained on a match day, home and away. 3 o'clock kickoff. We'd be on Vicarage Park or Vicarage Stadium, Vicarage Road. We'd be on the grass at 9 a.m. We'd be doing shadow and he'd be talking, and we'd be on the pitch in our training kit. And it used to drive me crazy. Like, you're up early, you're getting there, you're on the pitch, you're getting ready. And then, you know, you'd shower probably by about 10, half 10, and you'd go to the hotel for 11, then you'd have your pre-match, you'd all be together. He basically said that, he used to say, I own you on a match day. Forget your wives and your girlfriends and your tickets, you know, you belong to me. It's all about focusing in on the game. So he had you from 9 o'clock and you was preparing, but the rigmarole of getting changed and getting ready to go out and do, you know, you didn't do much, but it was just the idea of that, you know, I could have had another hour in bed and this, that and the other. And then away from home, we did the same. You'd find a park anywhere next to the hotel, a field, and off we went. And I just thought, have a day off, mate, come on. And he never did.
But that's reward.
And that's why you couldn't knock it, because when you see where you are in the table, there's reasons to why you are, you know, where you are. And you learn from that. As I said, there's things that I've taken, non-negotiables were hard work, commitment, and dedication, all the things that you'd expect from players. Talent will be a bonus, really. He knew what players he was signing, but he just needed to get players who would buy into the work ethic, and he did that. So hence that they got back-to-back promotion, you know, back to the Premier League. You know, great manager, great times.
Were you disappointed that you couldn't stay there? I mean, I read that, and you might tell me this is different, that you weren't retained because you wouldn't move down to Watford.
Yeah, it was my decision.
That sounds crazy.
It was my decision, and I speak to players about this all the time, and it goes against the grain of football. It was my decision to leave. You know, I left there to sign for Chesterfield, but we was due, you know, our last child. My wife was pregnant, and when I signed for Watford, I had all intention of moving back to London, being from London. But people need to understand that what happens in football is, within any time you're told that you're not going to be at a club. You know, a manager can say, look, you're not for me anymore, and it's been said, and it does, you know, on a Monday, and you could have relocated. So I always had to think about my family first for me, and I could commute. That wasn't a problem. But it's sometimes a problem for clubs and managers, and it was a problem for Graham, because every other player had bought into that, and it was in the contract that you had to move within half an hour radius or whatever it may be. So I understood that, and I had full intention of doing that. And I looked at properties, and I was commuting from East London, where my mum lived, and it was like 25 miles around the M25, which would take me like an hour and a half. So I'm thinking, I could commute from Nottingham, which I was doing, you know, some days, you know, 125 miles, and it would be like 2 hours or 2.5 hours. So I begrudge the fact that you're going to make me relocate and move down south just, you know, so that I'm within the radius. And also you can stay over. I can stay at my mum's. I can stay in a hotel. So for me, it wasn't an issue. Lots of people commute to work, but it was a problem for him. And we was professional, and we did the season, and we did what we had to do. But when it came to the end of the season, he was like, you know, I need people that are going to be committed. I said, I am committed to the club, but, you know, I have got a new child on the way, and I would rather be close to home. So, you know, I'm happy to move on. Again, if you have that conversation with a manager, you have to read between the lines. And it was a decision I made for my family, for me, and I moved on to Chesterfield. And, you know, sometimes I regret, because they got promoted again to the Premier League. So I watched that and I thought, I could have been part of that. But I've always done what's best for my family and for me. So I can't regret that, right? So when I speak to young players and they ask me things around that, I say, look, do what's best for you and your family, because they're the people that are going to be there with you, you know, all the time. And people talk about loyalty in the game. There is no loyalty. Be loyal to yourself, be loyal to your family, and just do the best you can for your clubs.
Yeah, I guess, look, we always talk about loyalty with footballers, and actually talking to someone like you who has been in the game for 21 years and gone so many places, you've done what you needed to do to get on. Like, I was listening to your story about not signing for Aldershot and then signing for Notts County. You'd signed on the dotted line, had to go and get the FA involved because actually Notts County was on your doorstep and that was going to be better for you and your family. You know, that's actually the opposite way, isn't it, of being loyal? Actually, I want to do exactly what I want to do, and that's led you to being... playing till 41 years of age. We'll get to that in a while, but I like that story actually of you not just kind of rolling over and sticking to what you've done.
I'm impressed that you found that little nugget. I mean, that's true. I mean, that caused a real bone of contention, but I was probably I signed too quickly for that club. I was at Northampton.
Was that you just being desperate to play somewhere else?
I mean, I was never without a club, so people could judge players all they want, and there's lots of players who leave the game at various ages, so it's not easy to stay in the game. But I always had offers. So whatever people think of me as a player, and then people will always say, you was this, you was that, I always had offers to play football, so I knew my value, and people in the game knew my value. I wanted to sign for Notts County a number of times over the years, but they just wouldn't sign me. You know, their owners and this, that and the other, and Howard Wilkinson.
Close your ears with the way Forest fans.
Listen,
he wanted to sign for them for years.
I wanted to sign for them because it was on my doorstep.
I know.
And I was commuting, travelling to all these other clubs everywhere. So this is how football is. You know, I moved to Nottingham and I played for Forest, and then I end up commuting to clubs all over the country.
But you did do quite a lot of the Midlands. The Corby, the Ilkestons, Chesterfield, you know.
Yeah, you try. You try.
You did try. I saw.
You try, but I mean, I went to Falkirk.
Scotland.
I played in Scotland, so... I would go wherever I had to go, and being from London originally, some players will only play down south and some players will only play up north. I thought I'd just play in the London region and play for London clubs.
You never got Leighton, did you?
But it didn't work out. It didn't work out that way. You know, I've gone from Charlton to Lincoln, from Lincoln to Southend, Southend to Forest, Forest to Watford. So again, you can see I'm up and down the country. Where am I going to live? I was buying, I was renting. You know, it became very hard to juggle that. So at some stage, I made the decision that we're going to live in the Midlands, I'm going to commute to all my clubs, and I'm going to do what's best for my family. So signing for Notts County on my doorstep, finally, was perfect. But what happened is I signed for Aldershot. They came in really quick. They was really desperate. They was really keen. They did everything. So I had no gripes with them. I was really sad that I had to disappoint them. But then a friend of mine who I played for at Lincoln, and a former teammate, Steve Thompson, got the job at Notts County, and he always said if he got another job he would sign me, and I was like, yeah, I'd always play for you. He got on the blower. He said, look, come and sign for Notts County.
Oh God, I have to go and make the worst phone call of my life now.
They had one player. They had Mike Edwards, who's like the stalwart of the club. He'd always been there, and David Pipe, and I think they pretty much building a whole new squad of players. But he said, look, you'll be a key component for me. Come and sign. I said, I want 2 years. He said, the owners and the chairman said they're only going to give you 1 year. Ageism. That's what happens in football.
Well, you're 35, yeah.
I was 35, and like I'm telling people, I do a lot of stuff with EDI, like whether it's football or whatever. Ageism is a big thing. So from 30 onwards, there's no resale value. You know, people look at you and they won't sign you or they won't bring you in, and there's always a threat that you might want to be a coach or a manager. So to get that offer at 35, I got a 2-year offer at Aldershot. I needed a 2-year offer at Notts County, right? Simple, because I've already got that. I've signed that. The deal's done. So they had to relent and give me the 2-year deal, and I didn't let them down. I had, my first season, top goal scorer, led the line. I was captain, club captain. I was always professional. I wouldn't commit to something if I wasn't. I wouldn't want to shame myself or let myself down. So I repaid them, I believe. They got value for money out of me, but it caused a bone in contention with the FA. You know, you signed a document, a legal document, but we had to just say, look, there was no money exchange. No, I've not received any payment. Come on, you know, let's just get it done. And yeah, I think it's one of the rare times that we've able to overturn it. Bone
of contention with the FA. Bone of contention with the Forest fans playing over the road at Notts County.
Nah, that was fine. And I played pre-season at Meadow Lane. Forest came over. We played a pre-season game. I got a really good reception. I played for Boston pre-season against Forest. Got a really good reception. Listen, fans understand that, yeah? I think I was 35, man. Come on. I've played for all these teams since. I've lived in this city for so long. I don't think many people could begrudge me. I know some would because they're diehard fans, but not many people would begrudge me the fact that, come on, he's got a chance to live locally and play locally.
Another team which I guess was Relatively local, Peterborough. I'd love to hear what it was like there under the character that is Barry Fry. I used to work on Nickelodeon on a football league show called Nick Kicks. It was a children's show. And we used to go to Peterborough and chat to Barry, and I was just like, you're a hoot. And so I only met him in passing a couple of times and at this awards evening. He was always such great fun. So I can't imagine what it was like to be kind of in and around him for quite a few years, actually. You had a loan spell there, didn't you? Then you got signed.
I played for him twice, so I knew him really well. I think he's Marmite for a lot of people. He's like a car salesman. And if he was working with you and children, he must have been on his best behaviour because he can swear. But I knew him. I went to Southend from Lincoln, so I knew what he was about. And he was struggling at the time. He bought the club for £1 because of financial problems they had. He inherited all the debts, remortgaged his house. He ran me on New Year's Day. And I wasn't even fully fit. I was recovering from a cartilage operation. I said, look, I'm still doing rehab. He said, I don't care. Just having you in the building will help. Will you come in New Year's Day? So I've gone there and I'm trying to work my fitness, and I'm thrown straight into the team. So he wasn't getting the best performance from me right in the beginning. But what endeared me to the fans is I scored the winner against Northampton, which is a local derby. And if you score in a derby, you're one of ours. One of ours then. So, but we went from third bottom to the playoffs. Won the playoff final, got promoted in that season. So pretty much to what Steve Cooper did here. He took a team that was struggling. But he's always had that Marmite relationship with the fans. I think it's the way he talks maybe sometimes, and people. He's like a car salesman. He's good at recruitment. He's good at buying players. He's not a coach. He's not a coach in that respect. He's a motivator. And if you see any of his stuff online, that is what he's about, screaming and shouting and just anarchy and chaos in the changing rooms.
And obviously, fans are going to love what he tried to do for the club, though. You said he
saved the club.
Buying it for £1, taking on the debts. That must mean he's got a love for that football team and wants to do well for it.
I think he's life president or whatever it is. He's there, and rightly so. As I said, he saved the club. He did what he had to do, and he achieved some success on the field as well. So there's always going to be people that dislike you for whatever reason. You can't have likes from everybody, right? It is what it is. But I know that for me to play for him twice, he must have been a good guy, because I had opportunities to play for other people twice and I chose not to. So, it's in my hands who I want to play for. I played for him when I was a young player, and then I played for him as a senior pro. I knew what it was about, and if you go in and you do what you want to do, and you have good players around you, he will allow you to do that. He's very good at bringing young players in and selling them on. So that's always exciting to see some of the exciting players that he brings in. So, I enjoyed Peterborough. The unfortunate thing was I was injured for half of my time there, half of my contract. Career-threatening injury. I played till I was 41, but at 30, ruptured my patellar tendon. I was told I'd never play again. To hear that, so when I'm working with young players, I'm always trying to tell them, you're never prepared for it. No player, when he leaves the game, regardless of what age, is prepared to be told he's not going to be playing football anymore. Well, I had a serious injury, and I hadn't put things in place, which was crazy. So ruptured my patellar tendon, started to re-educate myself, spent a year doing the rehab, got myself back. And obviously every year for me was a bonus from then. I was very conscientious and very professional, and had an eye on, my transition and what I was going to do next. So I didn't take my football career for granted, which I was doing to that point, which is crazy to be a 30-year-old man with responsibilities and not be thinking about, what plan B is, what's next.
So you had an eye on what was next. You did a bit of kind of academy coaching here. You're at Notts County a bit. What was that looking like in your 30s of what you thought you were going to do next?
I think, and not everybody wants to do it, I think like a lot of players, transitioning to coaching and management seems like the natural fit, right?
Surely for you as well. Playing across all four divisions.
It felt natural enough for me. I started to do my coaching badges from the age of 30. I was player coach at Peterborough. I was injured, and then obviously I got back into playing, so you focus on playing. So from the age of 30, I started to thinking about coaching, but I also did a sports media degree, broadcast journalism at Staffordshire University. I started to re-educate myself, went to college, went to uni. It was difficult, I'm not going to lie. I had not done any education from the age of 16, which is what happens to a lot of players. They come in, they're taken away from education and they don't continue, which, I work with players and try to get them to think about education. There's funding available from the PFA. they need to have an eye on the prize in terms of outside of football. You can focus on two. The dual pathway can work. Some coaches and managers will be quite selfish in that respect to say, you belong to me, go home, eat football, sleep football, drink football. I don't think that's conducive to a healthy mindset. So for me, it was a real bonus to be thinking about other things, doing other things, just educating myself and just being prepared, for the eventuality that I'm going to stop playing one day. I wasn't to know that I was going to play on forever and play for a long time and carry my body to where it got to. But that's why I was comfortable playing, because I enjoyed it and I did it. I was motivated knowing that I'm not doing it out of desperation, knowing I've got nothing else lined up. I can go and do other things, but I'm just going to enjoy my football, because once, you're a long time retired. Once you can't play anymore, the majority of players will miss it.
Obviously, you've got your role now at the PFA. Has that come about mainly because of what you experienced here at Forest, which is very well documented? Obviously, the racism that you experienced at the hands of two very well-known comedians in terms of Frank Skinner and David Baddiel. Did you feel you needed to go into a role with the PFA?
I'll say this before, before, during and after, I was always dealing with discrimination. So whether it was the pineapple, the Skinner and Baddiel, even before then I was dealing with racism. Playing in the 90s, playing football from the terraces and hearing it, and people were very, they was able to get away with it in front of your face. There was no hiding, people are more cute now, we talk about unconscious bias and this and the other. But in those days, it was just there. I grew up in the 70s, I grew up on a council estate. There was a lot of racial tension. There's a lot of things going on. Bullwater Farm, Tottenham, this, that and the other. National Front. It's always been there. I think we're in a different space now where people are doing more training, which is great, which I enjoy doing and delivering. But whether the Skinner Baddiel impacted me to thinking about going into that may well be the case. I just knew that I had a story to tell. I can certainly identify with people that are under duress, who are dealing with discriminatory issues, and talk about allyship and about supporting people across all areas. I'm a real advocate for the women's game and other areas, and anybody I can support, I will help. It's about doing the work. So when the opportunity came at the PFA, it would be, I think, 2012, and I just finished managing at Boston United. So 2012, I saw a role, equalities officer within the PFA, very small, department of one at the time. Director of EDI, Simone Pound, she was on her own doing the job, doing the work, a female in this industry, a woman of colour. She needed support. So myself, Darren Moore went in, who's obviously a manager. He was working with me, Terry Angus, a guy called Riz Rahman. Me and Terry are still there. Darren Moore's obviously gone back into coaching and management. So, we went in and we really wanted to move it forward, move the dial and go and speak to players regularly, go and speak to stakeholders, do media, try and raise the profile of tackling discrimination, especially racism, because that's something that we can identify with. So really enjoy it. It's not easy. Some days it can be really taxing mentally, but more often than not I'm up for the fight. So I can have bad days, but more often than not I kind of reinvigorate myself and I get up and I do my work. And I think if you're prepared and you're honest, it's about having those honest conversations with people, which I really enjoy. Getting their feedback, letting them share, because that's part of the problem is people are scared to talk about it, most of the time. So therefore you don't know where you stand on a lot of these areas. So I do a lot of work around context and words and understanding. I want to alleviate the excuses.
You kind of just said there, you're up for the fight. If you knew everything you know now back then, would you have said more when you were being so terribly racially abused here at the City Ground in your tenure as a Premier League star?
I'll tell you what.
Because you didn't say much. We'll talk about this. Because
the way the world was, no one asked, no one cared.
No one asked.
No one asked. So there wasn't like I'm doing now. There wasn't as much media. You come out after a game, you do a piece. So if I scored a goal, I scored at Leeds and I held my hair up and that was me saying to everybody and anybody, there you go, have some of that. That was my way of letting people know and expressing myself. I've always believed that I'm resilient, but I know there are others that I've spoken to who are less resilient. And I don't understand why people should have to put up with what they're expected to put up with from people. So when we talk about resilience, it's a great word, but did I have to put up with that? I had no choice. Sink or swim. There was no way I was not going to continue my career. I was only a young man playing football. My way of dealing with it was to just go and perform and keep ploughing through and go and play and show people, especially if you're putting a good performance, you can have the last word. So I never had the opportunity. Nobody came out and said, do you want to do a piece? Do you want to do a media piece? And you want to talk about it? I was invited on the show. I was never going to go on the show. I wasn't going to gratify what they was doing. I wasn't going to sit there and be the clown and say, yeah, what you're doing is great. I'm not overly sensitive. I just don't like what you're doing. I'm not happy with it. What do you expect me to do? Laugh along with people who just don't understand the connotations and the full depth of what's happening. People didn't understand.
Did you feel like you had to laugh along though? And laugh at yourself being ridiculed?
I didn't laugh along and I didn't laugh at myself, but I've got a sense of humour. So I understand, some things are funny if you're making a mistake and this, that and the other. Of course, you can take that. But the nuances around it, family and friends, wearing dreadlocks, when people ask me to this day, you pineapple head or did you use a pineapple? No, I have to stop them in their tracks and say, actually, I had dreadlocks, which I tied up. I tied my hair up, that was it. When I wasn't playing football, I wore them freely. For the black community, it's a big deal. Hair is a big deal for a lot of people, having to explain to people that you can't really be mocking someone because of their appearance, because people want you to conform. When you go to school and this, that and the other, especially for a lot of black people, they're told to cut their hair. You're not allowed to wear braids, you're not allowed to wear dreadlocks, you're not allowed to have an afro. It's like you're being told all the time how to dress yourself and how to appear. So that hit a lot of people hard. But people don't understand it, or didn't understand this. But when we talk about it, I always feel that the person, if they've got half a brain, they will understand and empathise and think, what, I didn't see it that way. And, maybe I was wrong, because lots of people I've spoken to over the years have apologised for the fact that they would have sang it and they would have been part of that. They've apologised. So for me, that's like, well, that's great, because now you're getting an understanding, which is, if it's my job to explain to you, I would do that. I do a lot of restorative work with people. You have to explain to people where they're going wrong. If they're prepared to listen, great. If they're not, then, move on. I can't do anything with that. But I never had the opportunity. We wasn't in a time where people wanted to hear about it. And they built up such a cult following, Skin of a Deal, during that period, that the wave was with them. There was no way I was going to be able to quieten that. I just needed to carry on and plough through it. So I had my days. I scored the winner. I scored the equaliser at Stamford Bridge for Forest against Chelsea. That's my way of saying, look, I'm still here. You've not ruined me. You've not killed me. I'm still here. To be a professional at the highest level takes a lot. And I know what it takes. And far better players than myself have not been able to attain that and have not been able to stay in the game. So, I'm immensely proud when I look back on my career. During the time, you just fully focused on doing what you have to do. But for me, it was never a hardship. It was never a hardship being a professional footballer. I loved it.
Just going to carry on a little bit, Jace, from what we're talking about there. Obviously, you're in the PFA now with your not new role. It's been in it since 2012. How much work still needs to be done? We've had Black Lives Matter and taking the knee. We've had No Room for Racism. We've had the blackout. We've had lots of different campaigns to try and stop racism in football. Is there something that you would do if no one had a say of what you were wanting to put in place? Is there something that you'd want to instill into the game?
With the hashtag Enough, I felt that I, off the back of Raheem and others talking about it, I needed to get players together. It was Troy Deeney, it was Raheem, Danny Rose at Spurs, there was Lyle Taylor. There was a number of players. Okay, let's come together. Let's try and lead something. Let's lead a movement. Let's get not only the game, but let's get the general public to back and get behind just shutting down your social media platform for a period of time. And I wasn't on social media then. I am now. I've popped up. People that have seen me have seen I've popped up out of nowhere the last year because I'm doing it to raise my profile and doing stuff around EDI and other bits and pieces. But for me, I understood what was going on, but it was my choice not to be part of social media. If someone's got something to say, come and say it to my face. But I know, I've got young people, young children in and around my life. That's their life. That's your life, social media. But what you're having to endure is just not on. So I was having to engage with social media platforms off the back of Raheem and players saying, we're getting destroyed online all the time. And we couldn't get Facebook, we couldn't get Twitter, we couldn't get them to engage in a conversation. Well, why would we? But when we threatened, which we did, the boycott, the social media platform, guess what? We had lots of meetings with these companies. I was having to travel to London, I was sitting there, I was engaging, I was having conversations, and we're still having the same conversations. Creating a platform where people can be safe and people will have to give up identification. For me, that's a non-negotiable. But people don't want to do that. Well, why don't you want to do that? Why are you hiding behind, these anonymous accounts? I want people to be identified. I want people to be accountable. That's something that could and should be done. So especially in the UK, we can hide behind some of the rules around other parts of the world and people don't have freedom of speech. But I think if we're serious about challenging social media, that would be one thing that we could implement. And you need to highlight the fact where people are getting prosecuted. Supporters are getting prosecuted. People are getting found guilty. I've dealt with a lot of discrimination cases where people are getting found guilty, and a lot of it's probability. So you have to have facts, you have to prove it. But we shouldn't be hiding, as I said, with the grey areas where social media companies, listen, let's be honest, they feed off the fact that negativity sells. It used to be the papers, now it's social media. Things trend when there's a really, disgusting topic out there. Whether it be Black Lives Matter and this, that and the other. People feed on it. There's a feeding frenzy and people buy into it. And the fact that you allow people to just be vitriol and say whatever they want feeds into it and it sells and it's a great product. But if we're serious about dealing with it, we would prevent that.
It's always cowardly though. It's security in numbers, isn't it, on the terraces?
Of course.
When there's people around you and it's a keyboard warrior at home. Rarely you'd have it, we hope not anyway, that someone would come and say it directly to your face. So hopefully, Jason, you're still part of this, creating some change and, it's got a long way to go. But hopefully that the role models that we have now in football are the new generation of players who have a voice, have a platform and, paramount in creating a couple of these campaigns that you've done at the PFA, which is great to hear about. I'm looking at the clock. I'm going to get out my phone because I have picture time / story time. Okay. This one is Barry Fry.
Yes, Bazza.
Obviously, we've already mentioned him. You've called him Marmite. Have you got a story about Barry? Yeah,
I try and keep them short because you could write a chapter on Barry Fry. But I signed from Lincoln to Southend, and he should have done his due diligence. I always scored against Barnet, who was his previous club, so he knew what I was about. But I'd got sent off at the end of the season for Lincoln, so he signed me for Southend. And the first game of the season, which is televised, is against Nottingham Forest. Okay, spoke about that earlier. I'm missing the game. Okay, but he doesn't realise. So in the pre-season game, I score a hat-trick against Cape Town Spurs, or whatever it may be, a South African side. And he's building me up in the media, saying, yeah, but, got the replacement for Stan Collymore, who's gone to Forest. It's going to be great, can't wait. And we're getting close to the game. And I'm thinking, you do realise I'm not going to be fit to play, or I can't play because of suspension. But we get to the Thursday and the game's on the Saturday, and he's still talking like I'm playing. So I'm like, Baz, I'm not available this Saturday, you know that. And he starts kicking off. He said, in all my years as a manager, no one's ever done that to me. And I'm like, well, just do your homework. I'm not going to tell you, am I? I want to sign. I was desperate to go from the 4th division to the First Division, the Second Division then, the Championship. I was desperate to move back to London. Do your homework. I've got one more game to miss. So I missed that game, and then obviously I came back in the next game, and I rewarded him because I got man of the match and scored the winner at Millwall. But he was peed. But what he also did in the game was and I can't imagine this happens very often, but he basically said at half-time, you're rubbish, you're coming off, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, whatever. I'm giving him some bat. I've got stripped off. I'm in the shower. As far as I'm concerned, my day's over. It's half-time. I started the second half.
You were in the shower?
I was in the shower. As far as I'm concerned, game was over. I'm not playing again. He sent his assistant in and said, look, go and get him. He's starting second half. So I had to quickly dry off and crazy. Imagine that, right? So I start the second half, and this is typical of the man. Did
you have a fresh kit, or did you have to put the one on you'd taken off?
No, there wasn't two kits.
But that's what I mean.
I put on some old style kit, but the point is, and he never held any grudges. I think some people are really petty like that. You know, we used to have kicking and screaming matches all the time. It's done with. You know, let's go and perform and go and play. So as I said, for me, that was a young Barry Fry. I played for him as a senior Barry Fry. I knew what to expect. I knew what it was about. But, you know, I've always held him very fondly.
I like Barry Fry. Next one.
Who's that? Jimmy Bullard.
Jimmy Bullard.
It brings a smile to my face, Jimmy. We still speak. I'm in a posh WhatsApp group. We know what Jimmy's about in terms of his humour.
Was he there when he was with you with Barry Fry?
Yeah. So he came in from West Ham. Him and a couple other players, young player as myself, Leon McKenzie, Andy Clark. We're there. I'm a senior pro. So always wanted to see, always enjoyed seeing young players coming in. Jimmy Bullard, full of energy. Like
still is, right?
hyper active. Like, can't keep still, can't stop talking. So he comes in and, I'm enjoying his banter and this, that and the other, and he would wind people up all the time, all day, every day. But it got to the point where, you know, and I can sympathise. Hair's a big deal. I've said that already. You know, in my life, hair's a big deal. He used to get a lot of stick about his hair, what he looked like. I used to call him Grandad because I thought he looked like a granddad, even as a young person. But he came in, he had this big mop, you know, curly hair, and he was irritating the boys. And it got to the point where I could hear him talking and say, "Look, we're going to shave his head. You know, someone's going to bring the clippers in. We're going to shave his head." And I was like, I want no part of this. I want no part of this because, you know, people had threatened to cut my locks back in the day, and I knew that would have been death, like end of. So, okay, they pin him down. You know, some of the boys, they pin him down. They get the clippers out. And if you're trying to, like, shaving a sheep, you can imagine you need to take a little bit off, right, before you start shaving in. They've put the clippers in. The clippers just got caught right in the front there, and it's just taken out a big lump. And they realise that they can't go any further, and it's like, oh dear. So the clippers are stuck there. He's running around the change room going mental, like, I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna kill. And he's really literally, he's like upset. He's crying. He wants to just destroy the whole place. And he didn't let it go. So, you know, on a match day, basically his revenge was he went round the change room and cut all the trousers off the suits. Just cut the legs off. Deal with that. So, I mean, he left mine, to be fair, because
there you go, because you weren't involved.
I was happy with that,
clipping.
but he went round and he just scissored all the suits, man, and I just thought, yeah, fair play to him. And the boys was devastated, but you get what you asked for, payback.
If I Google Jimmy Bullard missing tuft of hair,
you won't find it.
Won't find it.
You
Okay,
won't find
I won't waste my time then.
You won't find it.
Right, final person. And I don't know if you have a story about this guy. You're chairman at Watford, Elton.
Yeah,
John.
yeah, I do have a few stories. I mean, Elton, great guy. As I said, he, you know, lifelong Watford fan. He's done a lot for the club. When I signed for Graham Taylor being Graham Taylor, he really did drag out the negotiations. I mean, I went down there, pretty much knew what I wanted and what should be agreed. And generally, that's the thought process. You're just going to go there and you're going to get it done. But I've gone there, and he's showing me around the stadium. He's showing me everything, and I did a medical. And believe it or not, in those days, medicals at some clubs wasn't very thorough. You know, I've been to clubs, even with Barry Fry, there was no medical. You do for me, go and play, which means no insurance and this, that and the other. So crazy. Anyway, so Watford, he was thorough. So I shouldn't have been surprised. This should have alerted me to the fact. So I did the medical, which was crazy, you know. VO2 max, he's sprinting on the treadmill. You know, I'm thinking, bloody hell, he's trying to ruin me right now, but he wants to see how fit I am. Did the medical, got showered, got changed. Still talking, still in his office. Come on, let's just get to the money. Let's get the deal done, because that's what it's all about. And he's dragging it out. And I'm thinking, what's going on? You know, my agent's already spoke to him. I'm on the phone to my agent. I don't think I'm going to sign. Like, he's irritating me now, like really getting on my nerves. I just feel like I'm just going to go home. So the phone rings and Graham goes, there's a phone call for you. And it wasn't mobiles in those days. Right, there's a phone call for you. And I like, picked up the phone. It's Elton John. And I'm thinking, wow, this is big. I've never spoken to Elton. And he's like, listen, between me and you, you know, he's just being Graham. He's going to sign you. We've got it all sorted. Just hang in there. He knew already he knew already. He said, look, I can't wait. I'm excited for you to join the club, and can't wait to meet you. Just get it done. And I was like, okay, that rested me. I felt really good about it, and I thought, I put the phone down and I just thought, let's just get it done. And he said, yep, not a problem. He knew, obviously, between them they colluded. That's probably the way they worked with players all the time. But also, you know, Elton would be at games, he'd come in regularly. And Elton, you know, during that time, you've got to remember Princess Diana passed. And, you know, he was the 97? one. He was the one that sang. You know, we won the league. He's the one that, you know, played at a funeral. And that was big, you know, the respect and the admiration that everybody, you know, the outpouring, not only for Lady Diana, but for Elton. And we got to see him and be part of that and say to him, like, that was incredible, man. I mean, but really, you know, really humble guy when you consider he's like royalty, isn't he, Elton? But he loved his football. So when he came in, he was just one of the boys.
Well, very varied bunch of
people,
guests there. But, you know, all got a story and all kind of make you kind of go back to yesteryear and think of a memory. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
For sharing them. We have one more thing.
Okay.
Sorry to keep you. I'm keeping you a long time
here. Is this a surprise?
No, this is question time.
Okay.
More question time. This is the leaderboard of Nottingham Forest.
Competitive nature kicks in.
Leaderboard here at Forest. So you can see who is on top. Is it still Yatesy?
Yeah, 5.
5. Okay, so we've got 6 questions. 5 I'm going to ask you. 1 is a listening question. So they're all like about you or your career or related to you. So you should be good at this. Right, question 1, Jason. You reached the quarterfinals of the Europa Cup in '96. Who went on to win that year?
Must have been Munich, right? You're telling me they lost? I'm going to say Munich.
Correct! It's not a trick question.
Yeah, it had to be, but yeah.
Okay, that was a real easy one to get you going. Number 2, your namesake, Jason Lee, is an American actor. Which TV series is he best known for?
Is it My Name's Earl or something like that?
You're so annoying. That's
of course I know. I'm going to know that because if you Google, you get me or him, right?
Well, I didn't know. I was like, how much does this guy Google himself? Clearly a lot. Right, 3. Which player from your Forest days finished their career in New Zealand?
New Zealand.
And you've spoken about this chap a lot, actually. And do you want me to tell you the team? Because it's fine, it's the New Zealand team.
Yeah, tell me the team.
New Zealand Knights. Doesn't really give much away there, does it?
Oh, I'm gutted. I can't. How can I not know this?
Shall I give a clue?
Yeah, give me a clue. Come on. That's a tough one.
A father and son duo.
Oh, Alfie.
No, Scott.
Oh, Scott Gemmell.
Yeah.
So I don't get that.
No, you don't get that. You got 50-50 there. 2 out of 3.
Scott
New
Gemmell.
Zealand Knights. There you
Really?
go. Yeah. 4. Frank Clark gave you your debut at Forest, but when he was a manager, which other teams did he manage? So don't say Forest, obviously. Other teams.
I mean, Leighton Orient, general manager, if you want to include that. Man City. I don't remember him managing after Man City. I think he was assistant at Newcastle or Sunderland. That's it for me.
That is it for him. So 3 out of 3. I didn't think you were going to get Sunderland. There you go. So 3 out of 4. Question 5. In your first season with Forest, you finished 3rd in the Premier League, or your first full season. Who finished 1 and 2 that year?
Oh, man. I'm going to go United. United and Arsenal.
Blackburn Rovers and then Man United. Are you giving you a point for both? So Blackburn won that year.
Yeah,
and United were second. Okay, so that is 3 out of 5. Bonus question. This one, you have to listen to this track and guess this player.
My dad was a footballer and also played for Forest back in the day.
Ugh. I'm not happy with that.
Do you know what he says, firstly?
My dad was a footballer and also played for Forest back in the day. So he was a player, this guy who's talking.
He's a current player.
Oh,
I gave you a clue there, you know.
Oh, man, I'm not happy. I'll be here all day, I don't know.
Dad was a footballer and also played for Forest back in the day.
Played for Forest back in the day?
Yeah. You'll kick yourself. You literally will. I'm getting ready to write a big old 3 or 4.
Oh, I'm devastated.
I'm
a current
current
player
player
as well. I just can't even think. My mind's gone blank.
Shall I tell you?
This is the pressure of being on the.
Dun, dun,
the
dun.
lights. Yeah.
Brennan Johnson.
Oh man!
I told you.
That's terrible
Kicking
for me.
yourself. You got 3 out of 6.
That's terrible. That's bottom.
Are you? Oh my God.
I'm last place.
You actually are.
Oh,
Man,
disappointed.
How do you not know who beat you to the
Yeah.
Premier League title that year as well? Blackburn Rovers.
Yeah.
Anyway, Jason Lee, you scored 3. Thank you very much for taking part in the Nottingham Forest leaderboard.
Killed
Boom.
me. You've ended on a negative there.
I did, but there was lots of positive. Thank you for chatting to me.
You're welcome.
I appreciate your
Loved
time.
it.
And really good luck with all your work at PFA, and hopefully I'll see you at the City Ground before the season's out. If you like that, remember to subscribe and hit the subscribe button wherever you listen to your podcasts as well. And we'll be back for another episode very soon.